I'll just by way of introductions, my name is Sabiha. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm a co-owner, member of Design Action Collective, a graphic design and web development firm that is totally worker owned, and we are all based in Oakland, on occupied Ohlone land in Oakland. And I thought I'll just start by showing you a couple case studies, give you a little bit of background information on why I do this work, and then we can open it up for questions. And I have the list of questions, Joshua, that you sent ahead of time, which are really juicy, so I'm excited to get into those.
Fantastic.
Okay. Oh, I do need you to enable screen sharing. Sorry.
Okay. Um, there we go. You should be able
Yes.
to.
Perfect. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. Um, so when I think about graphic design and social change, my mind often goes to the activists in Paris in 1968 who were part of an incredible kind of citywide uprising around a number of issues, including workers' rights and gender justice. And these were there were students at their respective universities who kind of seized control of the resources they had available to them to start screen printing anti-capitalist messages to plaster the streets of Paris with. They were responding to this revolutionary political moment and really tapping into what they knew how to do as artists and using the tools and the technologies that they had. And it really, the art and graphic design of that moment really just grounded that in kind of this moment of history and continues the styles and just kind of screen print aesthetic that was so emblematic of those moments are continuing to inform the kind of graphic design that I get to work on today. And other examples of incredible graphic artists are the members of the Ozpol collective in Cuba. Was also active in the 1960s. This was a project of international solidarity. Their posters that they created carried messages of just kind of seeing each other's struggles as connected from the Philippines to India to Palestine to the streets of United States cities in Black Power activist work. And they were all translated into multiple languages as well and just had a very saturated visual aesthetic that also, again, continues to inform this kind of legacy of graphic design for social change. And oops. Another creator of incredible work that you may recognize is the work of Emory Douglas, who is the kind of Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party, and really defined a visual language of Black beauty and Black power that was featured in the Black Panthers newsletter that was distributed widely and actually distributed out of a location just down the street from where I live now. So again, like Emory Douglas used the tools he had available as someone who was studying at community college in Oakland, not having a lot of different colors to use, but using things like Letraset and just the kind of art supplies that he could get and making some really creative and innovative imagery out of it. So I share these just as an example of what grounds me in and I continue to draw inspiration from. But Design Action Collective story starts with Inkworks Press, which was a shop that was founded in the 1970s in Berkeley, California. And the folks that founded Inkworks really had a vision for a print shop that would serve social justice movements. This was a time when the idea of the freedom of the press belongs only to those who own one really rang true. You couldn't get your anti-war posters or socialist newspapers printed just anywhere. So the idea of activists and organizers, of revolutionaries coming together to provide this resource to people's movements of professional, high-quality offset printing was really important. And they modeled their values in the way they worked with one another being completely worker owned, running the shop democratically, having a shop that was, had a lot of women leaders and press operators, which is just a really exciting story for someone who was studying graphic design in the early 2000s to see this legacy of work and visit Inkworks Press as a young designer. But two members of Inkworks spun off and founded Design Action Collective about 16 years ago because they were seeing that there wasn't just a need for printing services, we needed graphic design services before the ink hit the paper so that our movements could really articulate a clear vision and have some really fierce visuals. So Design Action then grew over the years. We're now 12 people. We all come from activist and organizing backgrounds. We put a lot of energy into trying to develop our team, made up of folks who have been historically excluded from our industry or had trouble accessing our industry, to make sure that we are really blurring the lines between the folks that we're working for and who we are. And I feel really grateful for that sense of community and also just growing political education for myself as I'm a member of this shop. Constantly learning from my coworkers, my teammates. And, we continue to be worker owned and, sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my forwarding. We continue to be worker owned and, run the place democratically. We're also unionized. So that's been really important for us to continue to check back in on our policies to make sure that we are actually holding ourselves accountable to our stated values. And we can get into that a little bit more later. So what are we up against too as media makers? We are living in a world where companies like Wells Fargo and Chevron get to pretend to be the champions of working class people of color, which we know is bullshit. And, our stories and our struggles are often co-opted and sold back to us in the form of major label clothing. And in this case, the Pepsi commercial with, I'm sorry, having a little bit of trouble advancing my slides. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 sec. And let's try this one more time. Okay, so as I was saying, the idea of our stories being co-opted and sold back to us, in this case, the Nike advertisement featuring Colin Kaepernick, or the Pepsi commercial where somehow Pepsi ends police brutality by giving cops Pepsi. So this is the world that we're living in too as media makers in social justice movements. And even when we do see our stories and struggles explained or included in Hollywood films or high school history books, they're often stripped of the really complex and nuanced mass movements that made them and are just simplified down into this singular figurehead, keeping with that culture of celebrity. So really, it's up to us to tell our own stories and figure out strategic visual tools to help us do that. When Design Action created the Black Lives Matter logo, we did so we had the opportunity to do so because Patrice and Alicia and Opal, who were the three women who founded hashtag Black Lives Matter, they had worked with members of our shop over the years. Like, we had built trust over time. And so when this hashtag popped off, they knew they could come to us to create something quickly that would be useful to create a visual kind of identity for all the messages that were happening. And so we were really honored that they trusted us to do that. We were able to create this Inkworks Press printed a number of these placards really quickly, and they ended up saturating the streets within days. The image was, of course, a free download. Folks shared on social media or changed their profile pic to. And, as in a leaderful movement, as the kind of, quote, brand of Black Lives Matter evolved, in the hands of so many activists who are finding ways to really lean into this issue of dismantling white supremacy. In this case, understanding, for Asian folks, understanding what the model minority has meant and how that implicates us in white supremacy, and really looking at what kind of Asians for Black Lives is going to mean for our communities. They were creating art. This was actually a piece by Micah Bazant in collaboration with Model Minority Mutiny. This was the website that Design Action created after another Black designer did a new version of the Black Lives Matter logo. So, it has continued to move through different organizing spaces, and we're not trying to control that brand, but we also want to kind of continue to check in about where we're useful. One other case study I wanted to share is just very close to my heart. When the first Muslim ban was announced in 2017, when Trump had just taken office, it was like one of his first executive orders to shut down the entry of all Muslims into the United States by singling out several Muslim majority countries to ban from entry, or anybody who was had a visa or was a green card holder from one of those countries who was coming to the United States. And Design Action Collective had been in conversation with a number of immigrant rights organizations in the months and weeks leading up to this moment, because we knew something was going to happen. We didn't know exactly how it was going to go and exactly what it was going to say, what the executive order was going to say. But through those again, long-term relationship building and organizing opportunities, members of Design Action were able to understand that the most important message to lift up in this moment of crisis was to understand the relationship between the Muslim ban and the militarization of the southern border, and lift up this demand of sanctuary for all people. So we were not going to let the administration divide us about good immigrants who have our quote papers and bad immigrants who are quote illegals. We weren't going to let that conversation even happen. We were going to make sure that we had a unified voice under this kind of statement. And we were able to create this poster very quickly and distribute it so that when the protests happened at the airports, where people were cutting off of their flights from Iran and other countries and being detained all of a sudden, we could demand their release, but also under this banner of no ban, no wall, sanctuary for all. And because we created it in a way that was pretty easy to replicate, other folks came to the airports the next day, bringing their own versions of this poster, and it continues to be brought up, as the fight against ICE detentions and the separation of children at the southern border, and that fight continues. So that's been a really important kind of graphic design case study in my recent career, especially when you get to see it have a life of its own kind of out in the internet and be revisited in other moments of celebration. And so I want to close just because we do have a few questions about process. The case studies I just showed you were kind of the rapid response, politically urgent graphic pieces, but a lot of Design Action's work is about doing reports, doing multi-page documents, taking a lot of information and putting it into an accessible format. And one of our clients is an organization called the Greenlining Institute, which does an incredible amount of work to really study and measure the impacts of white supremacist systems when it comes to people's lives, livelihoods, where they can live, where they can work, what kind of governmental policy systems change allows folks to thrive. And we're in the midst of a project right now that's actually launching soon called their Transformative Climate Communities. And they needed to work with us to figure out, well, what look and feel kind of is going to be useful for taking a lot of data and putting it into a 100-page report with 5 different case studies that we can distribute to our partner organizations, that we can use to lobby at the city and state and county levels, that can even be a template for national policy. And so we explored a couple ways to do that. This was one idea, was to create a very colorful, saturated cover that put a bunch of montage images together. So you can see kind of on the upper right corner, someone's installing a solar panel. At the bottom, we have two women who are home care workers giving each other a high five. We have a backdrop of the kind of neighborhoods that folks live in. And then there's this kind of textural element of a mural. It's a lot going on, but it has a lot of vibrancy. And so that was a question for them of like, is this a direction you want to go? This is what the interior could look like, what kind of sample pages on the interior could look like, how we would treat body text and pull quotes. These are the kinds of things we need to figure out before we complete a full layout of 100 pages. Alternatively, we looked at this option, which had a very different tone. You know, it's much calmer, it's just more focused. There's not a lot of competing elements, and it still tells a very robust story about what it can mean to be transforming our communities. The interior pages also are very kind of more streamlined, more, a clearer hierarchy of information. These were the questions we asked, like what is going to best serve your needs for the way you want this report to be read and received. And so this was actually the option they ended up going with, this version here. And we just completed the project this week, actually. So because we went through those steps with the client and we could understand the story they were trying to tell, and also set up a good system of tools for us to pour through all of the data, we were able to complete the project in a pretty efficient way, keep the costs low for them, keep the busyness, hectic level manageable for our team, and get a project done. So that's always the general format we use to work with and collaborate with clients, is to kind of start with discussing options, narrow things down, get approval, and then finally move forward with executing the full piece. But whether we're doing reports like that or posters and social media graphics, I find a lot of satisfaction in whatever the collaborative process can be, given the time we have available. And I'll just end by inviting all of us to continue to embrace our role as agents of resistance in the different areas of work we may pursue. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for questions. Joshua, did you want to start with things that were on this list, or did you want to open it up to the folks here?
Let's, why don't we open up to the folks here if any of you have questions to ask, since we're live, and then if not, we can segue into the list of questions and kind of hit some of them as we go. But first, thank you so much, Sabiha. I really appreciate it. I'm really glad that you're here. So do we have any questions? Tony?
I'm afraid to unmute because of barking dogs.
Anyone else? Okay, well, why don't we kind of go off the list then, Sabiha? Do you want me to ask them and then we can do it that way?
Sure, go ahead and pick the ones you'd like to prioritize.
So, well, first of all, to my students, there were so many amazing questions, and this is a beginning graphic design class, and the level of thought and care that went into the questions, I was completely blown away by, because we're cramming a lot into 8 weeks. And so we're doing theory and practice and then, you know, and the whole idea of ethical design and really designing with empathy. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for those questions. With that in mind, some of the questions that I thought were really important was if you could talk about how you evaluate your clients and like how you choose the clients. So the question was, let me read it verbatim. Please describe the process by which Design Action Collective evaluates clients. Are there projects that the collective regrets completing because the client or message ended up not aligning with the collective's missions and values or your points of unity?
Yeah, I read that question. It's like, that's a very good question. I really appreciated it. Yeah, I think that for all of us, I invite you and I try and do this as well, and we do this as a group at Design Action, is really check in regularly about what our parameters are, where our lines are around the kind of work we want to do or not do. And we do at Design Action have very clear political points of unity. And so when we are very explicit about that, we tend to attract clients who also already align with them. And we are rarely in a position where someone is asking us to work with them and they are doing stuff that is in direct conflict with our political points of unity. It's happened maybe like a handful of times in my 15 years at Design Action that we've actually had to stop, nope, we can't actually do this. And it really is a gray area that we have to just talk it out to see like, where are we landing on this? But for the most part, when you're really clear about your values, you tend to attract others that share those values. And so it becomes less difficult to weed through the potential, bad decisions as far as who you might work for. But it's also good to articulate that as well. Like if you are a freelancer, maybe you want to decide like, I will definitely not work for an organization that is connected to the defense contracting industry or war, or I will definitely not work for a tobacco company, or I will definitely not work for a fossil fuels company. So though, depending on what your particular issue areas are that are close to your heart and where you feel the line is that you want to draw for yourself, which may be different than the place I draw my line, and no judgments. Like, this is something you have to make a decision for yourself, and we also all have different capacities to make those decisions. Sometimes, if there's financial pressures, you can't really afford to turn down that work. I invite you to be generous with yourself around making those calls and try and continue to stay true to your values and principles as best you can, as we all live under the pressures of capitalism. But yes, at Design Action, we've been really grateful to, for the most part, gain our client base through word of mouth, through participating in the issues that we want to work on. So the No Ban, No Wall poster, for example, was able to happen because Design Action Collective is active in a coalition called Third World Resistance. And so we meet regularly with immigrant rights and anti-imperialist organizations. We know what they're working on, we know their strategies, and we know what we can do that can be useful, and we have that trust. So when something happened quickly, we were able to all spring into action and not have to do a lot of trust building and processing ahead of time, because we already knew that we were already in the work together.
Great, thank you. And to kind of build off of that, another question that was really just really well worded and was, in relation to your collective's points of unity, how could one approach the matter of creating a design that accurately represents a certain group of people without being overtly stereotypical?
Oh yes, I loved this question. I know when we rely on symbols and silhouettes, we can often generalize and fall into traps around stereotypes. So that is definitely a fraught area to navigate as a designer. When I'm working on a project for an organization whose constituency audience base is from a cultural community demographic that I'm not part of, I really approach that with a lot of curiosity around what story they want to lead with, and make sure that we have enough points of collaborative feedback so that if I'm pitching something that, because of my own privilege, I'm not seeing a harmful impact of, that they can give me that feedback and veto it, and that it's not about my design ego getting hurt. It's about getting a project done in a way that's going to be useful and accountable to the folks that need it. So for me, it's asking for feedback from the most impacted people and not making assumptions about what other folks need, if I'm working for a group that I'm not directly understanding or part of. I do try and avoid using kind of icons and symbols that are rooted in just kind of a cultural landscape of white supremacy in the United States. And so it's hard to know, like, is this actually a symbol that's relevant, or is this just something that's been applied to this group by a power structure that has been oppressing them? So being really just kind of curious and humble about what you're an expert at and what you're not, and make sure that we're asking lots of questions, is helps avoid things like cultural appropriation or erasure. That said, I still make mistakes, and we will all make mistakes. So making sure that we have the ability to hear that and do what we can to make it right if we screwed up and caused some kind of harm, and try and have that be a learning moment. Of course, it really doesn't matter what my intent was if my impact was negative. So really looking at what is the impact of our work, what is the impact of our actions, and thinking about how we can make it right, make sure that never happens again, and do our best moving forward.
Yeah, I was to kind of to build off of that, I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about the idea of the danger of a single story when it's one point of view, or like if I mean, a good example is like a bunch of white men in Congress telling women how to what to do with their body, right? So that's the danger of a single story or the single point of view. So I'm wondering if you could kind of expand upon that in how it relates to the designs.
Yeah. I think one of the great benefits of having such a diverse team at Design Action Collective is that we're all able to give each other feedback on our work before a client even sees it. And the flip side of that too is we've been able to help inform clients about things that they maybe aren't realizing, because they, again, aren't seeing the whole picture themselves. And one example of that I'll just share is that I think I maybe told this story to you when you were in class with me, Joshua, was about a logo project that Design Action was working on for an international human rights, women's rights conference that was happening in Paris. So several years ago. And at the time, France had a ban on hijabs. So Muslim women were legally not allowed to cover their hair. And, as a Muslim woman who doesn't wear hijab, I have a lot of feelings about this. And I find it incredibly frustrating that there's kind of a Western feminist policing of what Muslim women can and can't wear in order to be, quote, liberated. So when we created this graphic that, based on the story that was happening, this international story of women coming together, we'd included an illustration of a hijabi woman. And one piece of feedback that we got from our client point person there, was that we needed to remove the hijab because some feminist organization in France was complaining that that was inappropriate to have in the logo. And I remember just being so enraged by that feedback, because what it was, the subtext there was that Muslim women can attend but they can't be in leadership, or Muslim women can attend but they should be learning how to take their hijabs off. That's how they become feminist Muslims. And I was just so angry about it, and all of my coworkers agreed that, like, this was an outrageous thing to ask us to do, and decided together that we were going to say no and not enable that kind of imperialist white supremacist narrative and erasure of Muslim people. So we were able to get on the same page as a group and put that back to the client, who then agreed with us, who's like, yeah, we didn't even really think that through. We'll just override that piece of feedback and move forward. But it took, if they'd hired another design team, they might not have gotten that pushback. And they were able, it gave some empowerment to other folks in that organization to say, if we cave to this Islamophobic edit, we're going to lose our design team over it. And so those were moments where I felt like, as somebody who maybe felt like quite a misfit in other design spaces I've been in, feeling like I had to kind of hide my Muslim identity because of the Islamophobia that the post 9/11 political terrain created, I felt so valued by my teammates that my perspective was really appreciated, that they agreed and empathized with it, that they understood the kind of political context of why it was important to push back in this way, and were willing to take the risk of losing that client. And there's been other instances too, because of members of our shop being active in the prison abolition movement or active in the trans justice movement, organizational spaces that I'm not personally part of, but they can similarly add that political context and nuance so that we're making the best decisions we can as far as designs we're offering, and we're also helping our clients be as true to our shared values as possible. And again, that said, it's not super simple. Like, we don't have all of the answers to boxes to tick, but when we have space for those conversations and those points of feedback, we have the best shot at having a stronger piece, a more effective piece, and one that more folks can get excited about.
Great, thank you so much. I guess because of the time, maybe if we could just close with, if you have any words of advice for up and coming designers in this day and age.
Yes, I'm so glad that you've chosen to hone your skills in graphic design. I think that when we think about visual communication, the best skills I want to continue honing myself are to be a critical thinker. So every time I'm consuming images, whether it's in my social media feeds or something that's being advertised to me, or some kind of mailers I get around election time, that I'm thinking critically about who is sending this to me and why, and what is the information here? What is the design trying to get me to believe, or what ideas is it trying to get me to accept? And just make sure that I'm asking those questions before I consume whatever it is, or as I consume whatever it is. And as a designer, I want to be thinking about my audience in that way too. So yeah, I would just invite you to trust your instincts and build the critical thinking muscles as you continue to operate, because we are clearly in a world of really saturated media, and being able to create things that can break through that noise and get to the audience that you want to communicate with requires that we understand what is the terrain that we're walking on. So yeah, I would end with that, and I'm happy to also provide my contact information. So if anybody has additional questions that they want to ask me, I'm happy to be emailed and stay in touch. And I wish you all the best in your studies.
Thank you so much, Sabiha. I really, really appreciate you coming to speak with us today.